Wonderful afternoon, and this is an absolutely power-packed panel. And in case you're wondering about the title, I don't know how many of you have seen that. I'll just read it. The regulatory cholesterol, and that word cholesterol rings a bell with many, many Indians. That is getting in the way of doing business. And in some ways, the person responsible for that session is sitting on my extreme left, Gautam Chikermane, my colleague also, former journalist. He's still a scribe, and he and others wrote a very good report, which was released earlier this year on the regulatory cholesterol. And the rest of the panel experts who I would say in some ways are doctors who can tell us what is the bad cholesterol and what is the good cholesterol. But I have to start with diagnosing the disease. And Gautam, what is the disease? Just one headline number from that disease, more than 6,000 different, I would say, nails in the neck or in the back. Why don't you take it from there and tell us what is the regulatory cholesterol that India faces at 75 years of its independence?
Yeah, so give me a minute to finish my numbers. There are 1,536 laws that govern doing business in India. These laws are enacted at the union level and some of them in rules at the state legislatures. Together, they add up to 69,233 compliances at an aggregate that businesses have to face. Of these, of the laws, half of the laws, of the 1,536 laws, half of them carry imprisonment clauses. Of the compliances, 2 out of every 5 compliances carries a jail term, an imprisonment clause. All told, there are 26,134 imprisonment clauses that businesses at an aggregate face while doing legitimate business. As a result, even though we have 6 million enterprises in India, 63 million enterprises in India, only 1 million are in the formal sector. The system is such that it pays to stay below the regulatory radar. You don't want to grow. Manish has articulated this very often in some of his articles, where we say that we make dwarfs out of our companies. We don't want them to scale up. The economies of scale that companies, for instance, in China, Japan, or other industrialized nations enjoy are kept away simply because you want to stay below the regulatory radar. Now, what does that mean? The moment a factory, let us say, of 150 people gets formalized, immediately, overnight, the company has to face between 400 to 900 compliances. For that, they have to spend around 12 to 18 lakh rupees a year. Which small entrepreneur, which small company has these kind of resources? So when we did this research, Siddharth, it came because, it came actually, we thought that 4 of us sitting out here, and we are discussing some college history, can be put into jail just for being here. And I'm sure there'll be some law somewhere, in some corner, some danky dark corner of India, of Indian legislation, where 4 people talking can be put in jail. From there, we went on to doing business, and this is what our report then finally came out with. Of the 26,134 imprisonment clauses for businesses, about 5,200 are at the union level. We believe that if some of these laws get rationalized, they will have an effect down the line on state laws.
Gautam, I'll hold you there on the solutions from the
not solutions.
Good doctors on the panel.
The last bit. There are 5 states, the last numbers, so that we can have a solider discussion. 5 states have imprisonment clauses of more than 1,000 each. Maharashtra, Punjab, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka. Among all of them, you would wonder, why is Punjab there? And this is perhaps then we can discuss later on.
Okay, Gautam, I'm not letting you go before I go to the doctors because you diagnosed the disease. I also want to know, where did it start? Did it start with the British? Did it start with their moves on the opium regulations? Did it start with the salt tax?
It started with the Defense of India Act 1930. And then onwards, right from the Factories Act 1948, the Capital Markets Act, you keep going.
What about 1955? The Awadi resolution. How
that was an ideological embrace, which the politics of India took and made him hardened
since you
these
talk
already
about
existing
politics,
laws.
who is responsible for the regulatory cholesterol? Nehru Gandhi?
I don't think so. I think every leadership has been guilty of increasing the number of imprisonment clauses. Look at the current government.
In the last 8 years?
Even the current government, when the CSR amendment had come, they had wanted to criminalize
But that amendment started in the UPA government.
No, in this government.
The lack of CSR compliance, that
it began in the UPA, but the amendment came under this government. And thankfully, what they said when there were protests is that we will not notify the law. And now I think it has been amended and things are going on. In fact, the Companies Act is one of the laws that is forward-looking among all the other laws. Factories laws is the worst.
A lot of work has been done. This is not to say that ease of doing business has not improved. And this is not an ideological political debate, because I'm going to the doctors who are stellar, the top of the top in the country in their respective fields. And just to add two things, as a cub reporter, I realized that you couldn't have more than one landline. There was a penal provision in the Indian Telegraph Act for that. And those of who you drink and store wine and alcohol from all over the world, there is still a law which caps the number of bottles that you can have in your personal premises. Mukesh Butani, good doctor number one, how bad is the disease? Is it more bad cholesterol, or have things changed?
I think you need to contextualize the debate. Mention about some of the old laws. We certainly have a legacy which dates back to independence. So if you look at the Criminal Procedure Code, Civil Procedure Code, and many of the procedural delays in the courts are attributable to that. Second, you also have reforms or laws that came in the economic reforms era post-1991. Some of them have worked, some of them have not worked. Let's take the efficacy of regulators. 60% of the regulators came in the last 30 years of economic reforms. How many regulators have worked effectively? In my view, the test of efficacy of a regulator is how many other regulations have folded in it. So we didn't want a regulation for commodities market. Forward Markets Commission merged with SEBI. There are good examples of good regulators, and there are equally bad examples as well. Mr. Puri a while ago was talking about some archaic regulation which I wasn't aware of, which is applicable to televisions in the context of what TRAI regulates. Certainly, a plain listening suggested to me that this is really not the order of the day. So I think you need to contextualize. I don't think you can generalize cholesterol. Many good things have happened. I just wanted to give you some examples how when regulations are thrust because of crisis, they are far more effective. So you just look at so many subjects in the COVID era. One direction of the Ministry of Home Affairs on subjects which are dual controlled by the state and the center, whether it's environment, whether it's pollution, whether it's factory, labor, all of these work very effectively. So what happens when you have to take a pollution control approval, or you have to deal with the inspector at the factory level? None of those applied, because you have to actually physically apply, go and grease somebody's palm over there and then make it work. In COVID era, none of that was happening, which means that lesser regulations have been far more effective than otherwise. So I think there is something to be learned from how regulations have worked more effectively in the crisis era than otherwise. There are many, many examples of that. I think as a nation, we are over-regulated. Certainly, there is need for us to avoid regulation. Right. But more important than that is a point that was made earlier as well. How are we reforming the bureaucracy? I think that's the elephant in the room, in my view.
That's a very good point. And before I go to Sanjeev, Manish, I want you to take the mic and take off also from where Gautam had tossed to you. How bad is the disease? Because these numbers from the ORF report, and Mukesh put some of it into context, how would you comment on that?
I mean, for big companies, it's a thorn in the flesh. It's not a dagger in the heart. For smaller companies, it's a dagger in the heart. See, the costs of this level of regulatory cholesterol are really long-term. India doesn't have a jobs problem. We have a wages problem. India's unemployment since 1947 has been between 2 and 8%. But we have obviously poverty of 40%. So this is important because if you think India has a jobs problem, you'll throw money from helicopters, you'll mandate a 3-day work week, you'll take away people's shovels and give them spoons to dig with, right? Because if bhuka nanga pyasa hai, then patient is in the ICU, why are you telling him to lose weight or quit smoking? But if we have a wages problem, the only solution is formalization, financialization, urbanization, industrialization, and human capital. You have to think about productivity. So the regulatory cholesterol in India, I mean, there's such huge transmission losses between how the law is written, interpreted, practiced, and enforced for big companies that this is not stopping us from doing business. I think it stops multinationals because they read the law as it is written, not how it is interpreted, practiced, and enforced. So I think the costs of this regulatory cholesterol are formal enterprises. I think they are productivity. I think they are wages, right? All 5, there's a 24 times difference in productivity between our biggest and smallest manufacturing companies.
So Manish, can you put a monetary number to what does it cost the nation and its economy in terms of this cholesterol?
In 1991, India and China had the same per capita income. Today, ours is 1/5 of theirs.
That's cost number 1.
Yeah, that's the most important cost, right? I mean, we may be 5th in the world in total GDP. We are 138th in the world in per capita GDP. And so while reforms have done a lot for total GDP, I think if you agree that per capita GDP matters more than total GDP, which is what we learned in COVID, then you will think about formalization, urbanization, industrialization, financialization, and human capital rather than NREGS. Is my view. Now, so the cost, where does this come from? It comes from civil service capacity. The human capital in civil services has declined to a point where they don't know how to enforce laws smartly without a jail provision.
And perhaps, if I may add to that before I go to Sanjeev, that the lawmakers also don't know how to make effective laws, including drafting.
Who is the lawmaker?
Oh, okay, that's a good, go ahead. I know what you're...
Civil services, right? Civil servants now write laws. The parliament and politicians have outsourced law writing to the civil servants. I mean, I was born and brought up in Kashmir, so, I wish Patel had won the Kashmir argument. But, Patel framed the civil services as the steel frame. Yeah. Right? But Nehru responded, the Indian civil service is neither Indian nor civil nor a service. and we need to reboot this system because it's an elite system for 2 lakh people to manage 300 million people. I think our jail provisions are a reflection of
that colonial mindset.
Well, there are only 6,700 IAS officers in this country out of the 25 million civil servants. I mean, civil servants in India would be the 50th largest country in the world, right? By population.
That's a wonderful point. Sanjeev, the cholesterol in the human body is manufactured in the liver, travels through the arteries, ends up clogging your heart. Our regulatory cholesterol has clogged up our economy and our nation in many, many ways. Let's now start talking about the solutions and what is required because we can spend the next 25-30 minutes on the solutions. Please.
So I think the first thing that I'll do is to go and count the number of scotch bottles I've had at home because I don't want to be caught on the wrong side. So, I think first, just a quick point. I think it's all relative, right? I mean, from where we started to where we have got. I do want to put this in perspective, right? Even in the US, and we all enamored by Western economies, it takes up to 10 years to get all approvals for a power plant. So let's not beat ourselves too much. I know that we can do much better, no question about it. But, even in certain states, and there have actually been businesses which have told me that they've taken 10 to 11 years to get all environmental approvals in an American state to set up a power plant. And between the time that they thought of setting up a power plant to the time that they actually got down to doing it, economics had changed completely. So I think at times we beat ourselves too much. I just want to put it in perspective. Now we're talking about what can we do more and better. I think we started talking about, for instance, to me, I think a number of those things are already in process. So for instance, you look at, we're talking about, yes, there has been incentivization for being small, right? But there is this MSME code which is now being proposed. Earlier this year, it's been proposed. If it comes through, I think that will be in some ways solving part of the problem, not the entire problem. I think Gautam himself said that the Ministry of Corporate Affairs possibly is one of the most forward-looking ones at this point in time in terms of saying what all should change in terms of decriminalization and otherwise. So I think it's a journey that we have undertaken. There are few things which to me stand out. I mean, for the last 15 years, I've been working with foreign investors largely. I think if there is one issue which every investor continues to be bothered about, it is really contracts. And how do we honor contracts, and how much time does it take to get a commercial dispute sorted in Indian courts? And again, possibly it comes back to how are we staffing some of these courts, for instance. I mean, there are conversations which happen where people say that, okay, this NCLT, this court is very slow. So let's go to another. Let's do a transaction in another state so that NCLT will actually help us do it in 3 months, will get us the approvals in 4 months and 5 months, not someone which will take, let's say, a year or 2 years. So I think that is one of the biggest problem. I would say if we can actually get more people into staff. We saw the same thing incidentally on the insolvency code. I mean, today we are talking about insolvency code. 4 years back, we were saying that insolvency code was one of the best things that happened to us. Today, many of us are saying that, well, I mean, it didn't do us much good.
Yeah, it's also clogged up.
It's clogged up. Why is it clogged up? Because, things are not happening. And today, if you ask any M&A practitioner, he'll tell you that, people are taking in NCLT courts are taking frivolous IBPI issues or insolvency issues, and that is why real M&A is not happening. So again, it goes down to how we are staffed and how quickly can we actually get to those approvals that we need. So I would say contract compliance, staffing our courts a little better, and I think the one other thing which has really been a huge problem all this time is that every time that we start looking up, we start looking backwards.
Okay.
And I want to make that point. Today India is in a position like no other country. Why would we want to take 2 steps back? For instance, I don't want to be critical of any specific item, but today I think we shouldn't be inward looking, we should be outward looking. We have everything working for us, the economics is generally fine. Why should we make any policies which might seem to an investor, we need more capital than less for our next phase of growth? Why should we come up with any policy which may constrain an investor, whether it is a windfall tax, whether it's an export tax, so on and so forth? Why would we do any of that? Unless we were to say that it's for a very specific period of time. Because that in some ways tells the investor that, okay, can I trust? We have gone through this whole thing about retrospective taxation. We came out of that. But then again, how do you build confidence? How do you get consistency in policy? I think those things.
Consistency, but Mukesh, I'm coming to you and then to you, Gautam. One of the heart attacks that the Indian economy suffered was on account of the Vodafone retrospective. I think it's a great example of regulatory cholesterol. Even putting a basic stent took many years, till I would argue open heart surgery was conducted by the Modi government and things seem to be fine. Is it all bad, or have substantive improvements been made? And to the point that Sanjeev made, aisa nahi hai that it's just in India. In the United States also, it takes you 10 years for approvals.
I would like to believe to a larger extent the government has stuck to that commitment. No retrospectivity, but we shouldn't forget the constitutional framework. Parliament is all supreme. So government will bring laws which are retrospective if they feel that the laws that were legislated did not deliver onto the intent, or for that matter, the final court of law interpreted the law very differently than what the intent was.
May I interrupt you? The Supreme Court on the PMLA, just to throw that in the mix also for your comments.
But then you have the same Supreme Court yesterday said that the 2 principles have to be reviewed, for which a larger bench has been constituted. So I think that way the 3 arms of the government, judiciary, legislature and executive, are fairly balanced, and we should, as Indians, be very proud about the rule of law. I think the challenge is on the manner in which we go about legislating the law. We have very limited consultative process. Third-party stakeholder consultation is missing. We have a fairly weird parliamentary process which says money bills are confidential. I wonder why. Just a simple finance bill that is presented in the parliament It presents the balance sheet for the entire country. Why are important changes pushed through the finance bill when they ought to be debated? So I think we require more debate. Even after the laws are legislated well, creativity of law officers from the government of India, creativity of the citizens at large, we are a country, as Mark Tully said, with no full stop. The litigation goes on and on. We don't have basis to stop the litigation. Our tribunals are manned by the best quasi-judicial judges. Why can't the government accept the decisions of the tribunal and say we are not going to go further? So I think we have a lot of challenges on the manner in which our laws are legislated with lack of consultative process, doing an impact assessment on every law. You take a case of UK, even if they want to legislate a general anti-avoidance law, they will debate it for 4 years. There will be parliamentary committees. Of course, we do that in the context of new laws. But how credible is the consultative process? I think there is a lot that we can do on stakeholder consultation. If there is a change in the income tax law, every strata of the economy, including the pensioners, should be consulted, in my view. And that cannot just be a mere formality. Secondly, after the law is legislated, I think we should be open for course correction. I must confess, in all candor, that insofar as insolvency and bankruptcy code is concerned, it's still a major reform after the GST reform. The government has responded to 7 amendments for the 2016 law. Let's take a case of arbitration law. 1964, we know that enforcement of contract is a big challenge, not just for foreign companies, but even for domestic companies. We've seen 4 amendments just in the last 5 years, which we never saw from 1964 to 2020 so far. So I think to some extent we are responsive, but I think in many aspects there is a lot that needs to be done.
Okay. Gautam, you heard Manish quickly rattle off 5, I think the 5 mantras: financialization, formalization. And the way I would like to describe it, India has 4 levels of government. You even need a panchayat level permission for something. And then you go to municipalities, then you go to state, and then of course the state. And then there is the invisible hand of the government, as always, Gautam. Will these solutions work, or is the ground just being laid for future reports from the ORF?
I think I set the ball rolling on a pessimistic note. Let me turn it around and give you some hope as to what's going on behind the scene. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has cited our report thrice, or the numbers from our report, and has said that he is reducing, the work is on, and committees are being set up, and they are going clause by clause, trying to finish it off as soon as possible. So the legislative intent, the executive intent is very clear, at least from where I study this phenomena. Second, and you'll be surprised to know, 5 state governments have approached us to work with them to reduce these compliances in the states. We are telling them to hold on for a while because, as I was explaining earlier, it's a little complicated because, for instance, if you look at the Factories Act, if you change one particular compliance, let us say, so let me make it, give you some interesting stuff here. If you don't lime wash the inner walls of the toilets every 4 months, or if you don't reconstitute a canteen committee every 2 years, the jail term for that is the same as for sedition. Now, such ridiculous laws are there, compliances are there, and I can rattle off many more.
No, Gautam, please do rattle off 2, 3 other examples. I was noting the audience response, I think.
Okay. if you don't have spittoons, you know what a spittoon is? Thukdan. If you don't have a spittoon within a certain distance from the factory plant and it is not cleaned, there is a jail term of which is equivalent to assaulting a woman with the intent to disrobe. That's the precise clause.
Does that apply to pawn shops as well?
They are below the radar, like I told you. You got to be a factory. And so what I'm saying is these are ridiculous laws.
For a couple more examples, at least.
Some more examples, okay. If you, I've done the lime wash, if you don't label a particular gas in a certain way, that this is the weight of the gas in that cylinder, this is the price, and this is the quality of gas. If you mislabel or don't label, the punishment for that is the same as, I don't recall, but it's 5 years. 5 years jail. And you know, whenever we're talking with the government at the union level, they ask, किसको जेल डाला आज तक? एक नाम दिखाइए हमको. They're very annoyed. Please tell us one person who has been jailed for any of these.
हमारा इंटेंट तो केवल डराना है, डंडा दिखाना होता है, लगाना थोड़ी होता है.
So this went right up till the top, and my answer was consistent all through, which is that if you haven't jailed anybody and you are feeling proud of it, actually you should feel ashamed because you're not doing your job. If there is a law and that law is being breached and broken and you are the authority to implement the law, irrespective of what the law is, you are not doing your job. And why are you not doing your job? Because this is rent seeking. There is corruption. And after which, and which is the fact. The kind of costs that are required, the kind of extortion that the boiler inspector or the labor inspector or the
controller of capital accounts.
There are 20 kinds of inspectors can extract from a person who has no recourse but to pay, because if you stall his factory for 1 month, there is interest on capital that he needs to pay, he will pay. Hold on. So let me tell you the good news. So 5 state governments have come and they want this change. We are saying you hold on, because the union government is already working on this, and many of these will get leveraged. Once those leverages are done, then we will work with state government. So the executive intent, not only at the union level, not only from Prime Minister Narendra Modi directly, but also from state governments, is being very optimistic, and we are very hopeful that within this year you will see some changes.
Can you just tell us quickly the 5 names of the states? Are you in a position to disclose?
No, I can't.
Okay, Mukesh, you wanted to come in.
I just wanted to say that the draconian law that he spoke about did not apply in COVID times. That was the
you mean the Spittoon law?
That was a liberalization driven by crisis.
Okay.
One Ministry of Home Affairs circular which applied to all states on dual subjects of labor and environment, none of these applied. So that's an example that when you want to liberalize, nothing happens.
Okay. Manish, okay, once again, and with the challenge that how will it be possible, the 5 things that you said, to me it seemed, and you were extremely articulate and quick about it, there are 4 levels of government. There is politics at every level. There are elections that are basically the big laundry machine. How will it ever happen?
I mean, there's just 3 phases of this project. There's rationalize, there's decriminalize, and there's digitize. Rationalize is the project which Gautam is involved in, and that's the discussion, which is just make a list of what you want to keep and get rid of them. Then you decriminalize the 26,000, the penal code equivalence, 5 years for disrobing a woman, 5 years for this. So I think the decriminalize project. But finally, the legal culmination is the digital public goods that we have created, say, in UPI or in CoWIN, or we're creating in ONDC. We need a national open employer compliance grid. It has to be architected like UPI, which is that there's an NPCI layer, which is non-profit. And every government department will have the ability to build APIs. And so then the private sector can innovate on top of that layer. I mean, Google just wrote a letter to the US Federal Reserve that, will you please copy India's UPI? And essentially, that is the innovation which we are doing, right? We're creating digital public goods at population scale in various aspects. I think if we do ONDC right, I mean, that will not just be that will just be a unique gift to the Indian economy. So I think the final destination of rationalize, decriminalize is digitize. And digitize is an equivalent of a NPCI kind of open architecture platform called the National Employer Compliance Grid, onto which you'll be able to build APIs, and then, we will just digitize this, and that'll make enforcement much easier. Today, if you're paying EDLI, nobody knows whether you're paying LWF. If you're paying EPS, nobody knows whether you're paying ESI. So my case to the government is, in India, if you follow a rule, you feel like you missed a deal. That's a little stupid, you know. I should have, why am I following the rule? I should call somebody, I should call PwC, I should call Mukesh, and then find out how the transmission losses between how the law is written, interpreted, practiced, and enforced. So I would just say, let's just calm down. I mean, rationalize, most people in government accept. Decriminalize, there is obviously some challenge, but it's happening. But the final destination is an national employer compliance grid, which is architected just like CoWIN, or like ONDC, or like GSTN, or like UPI. And these are the innovations where we can just skip the learning. So paperless, presenceless, cashless is the destination for compliance. Once we get there, corruption and automatically will come down.
I can see a glimmer in Gautam's eyes and perhaps another working paper for the government. Manish, the mic back to you before I go to Sanjeev. You mentioned 3 Ds. I'm posing a 4th basis what you said earlier. Demonetize the Sarkari Babus.
I mean, see, you don't need 74 ministries in Delhi, right? Japan has 8 cabinet ministers, the US has 14, UK has 22. What does the Ministry of Steel do? It's just Vela, right? I mean, they don't really do anything. So you don't need 200 people with the rank of Secretary to Government of India in Delhi. You should have 20 people. You have 200 people in the rank of Secretary. So the cylinder, I mean, the pyramid has become a cylinder. So I think civil service reform is absolutely part of this broader concept.
But if they are making the laws like you put it, then who does this reform?
I think it is politics, right? I mean, civil servants are the waiter, they're not the chef. I mean, right now the waiter is deciding the menu, but I think the chef should decide the menu.
Everybody maintains that in the Narendra Modi government, things that were never thought possible have been done. Can it not be possible in this government?
I mean, the Capacity Building Commission is a WIP right now. Its objective is exactly that. It is to increase lateral entry. It is to create some performance management. See, the heart of the problem is 99% of all IAS officers, Indian Audit and Account officers, and IRS officers are ranked outstanding. So when you treat Gadha Ghoda equally, the Gadha celebrates and the Ghoda gets frustrated, right? Any organization that doesn't punish its bad performers punishes its good performers. So I think at the heart, I completely agree with you. This is a reimagination of how the civil service is rewarded, how it is punished, how it is promoted, what kind of jobs they do. I mean, we bought Air India for 2 crores. We spent 1.5 lakh crores in the last 10 years putting into Air India. And for me, the Ministry of Skills budget is only 12,000 crores. You put 5 lakh crores into nationalized banks to recapitalize them. Their risk-weighted assets are lower than what they were 5 years ago. So I think the broader discussion of the government should do less so it can do more. Why are only 45% of kids in India in government schools? It's the most embarrassing number of this country. There are only 5% of kids in Japan in private school. There are only 10% of kids in UK in private school. There are only 15% of kids in the US in private school. So the government should do less, which is it should do primary health care, it should do primary education, it must do regulation, it must do competition commission, it must do SEBI, it must do monetary policy. But it must not do all this crap that they do.
In cricketing terms, what Manish is saying, you can't have everyone a Sachin Tendulkar in a cricket team. Sanjeev, I come to you, and this is to do with our taxation architecture, and we'll move away from B to B, if you permit me, to B to C. For many years, and Mukesh, I must have done like maybe 50 interviews with him on the direct taxes code. And when I say the direct taxes code is not because corporate India got a big tax break recently. I'm talking about the sheer difficulty that an average taxpayer may still experience with the taxation system and the way things happen. A lot of digitization, and this is very important what Manish is saying. It's not theory, it's actually happening. A lot of digitization has changed the interface of the common man with the taxation architecture. In terms of the regulatory cholesterol left as far as direct taxes are concerned, and I don't want to talk about GST because it's completely clogged right now, what is the scope for improvement?
So I think, from a consumer standpoint, I think it's been very, very progressive. I think when you look at things like, for instance, the equalization levy or the place of effective management, right? I mean, most of those start because people want to tax the digital world, right? But then, over a period of time, what happens is that you get into the physical world. And I think that's the challenge which happens. I mean, obviously, we are all doing a lot of digital trades today, right? And, you want to tax them, right? So the intention is right. But then, slowly, as some of those things start happening, and I'm just giving this as an example, then you get into the physical world. And that is where you start challenging the reason that they came up in the first place, whether it is, as I said, the equalization levy or the POEM and so on and so forth. I think that's something which continues to be a bit of a bother. I mean, we are obviously talking about further changes, further shifts. 2024, the whole OECD regulations will come into play, and there is this whole thing about, again, taxing the online world, etc. And what is the minimum tax that corporations will have to pay, global corporations will have to pay. I think that will be another pivotal point in the journey. So I think some of these things will incrementally challenge us. I mean, when you make a regulation, you actually define its boundaries. I think that's something which will help.
Mukesh, I don't know if you want to comment about the direction. Yeah, Gautam,
Can
go
I
ahead.
just come in here? Sorry. I think as far as corporate taxes go, totally with you. But look at what's happening to individual taxes. I think we had a very good equilibrium in Chidambaram's 1997 budget, which subsequent finance ministers kept reducing. Basically a 3-slab structure.
And that still prevails.
No, it doesn't. Now we have an 11-slab structure.
You mean
So I think we have complexified individual taxation law. We need to revert to 1997 in terms of structure and perhaps lower rates in terms of looking ahead. Just a small point.
So on individual taxation, if you really as an economist look at the principle of what we call it horizontal equity, high rates are very prevalent in major parts of the world. Corporate taxes have been brought down, but it's still complex. So I agree with Gautam on the multiplicity of the structure. To your earlier point, do we need a tax code? Certainly, yes. I think we should get rid of the archaic 1961 law. It's most complex. Though many of the recommendations that came from the successive committees, including the 2009 working group, 2017, when we thought that the new tax code is going to be ready, have been carried out in some shape and in some form. But I certainly feel that it's time for us to have a modern law. We cannot live with the 1961 law.
Will we get one by 2047 at least? India at 100?
I am confident we'll get one in the next 5 years.
Next 5 years. Manish, you wanted to come in.
Siddharth, can I just,
because
please. I think time is going by, and there is one very important point, which is at the essence of all these discussions that we are having right now, which is that I think the first 44 years of our country were spent we invested in something called poverty. We couldn't fix the wealth, so we decided to equalize it through poverty. 1991 opened it up, but the thought continues to linger till 2022 today. That, there is something very virtuous about being poor. Haath ka mail hai. Paisa to haath ka mail hai. We somehow, anybody who makes money, we suspect that that person has made the money not through legitimate means, but definitely through some wrong. I think, but the next generation that's coming, if you look at them, through the gig economy, through the people who are saying, we don't want to study further, we are here, YouTubers, influencers. You look around, there is a new energy, and that energy is being directed towards wealth, unabashed, following wealth. I think that psychological change, which the next generation is coming up, needs to be picked up by policy, by tax, by regulation, etc., so that this transition of India from a poverty to a wealthy nation over the next 25 years, becomes smoother rather than keep colliding. You have an ideological collisions. I think that time for povertarian ideology is now behind us. We need to aggressively go out and embrace wealth.
Okay, Mukesh.
No, I entirely agree with Gautam. The question is, how do you get to that journey? I think as a nation, we are terribly short of independent think tanks and institutions. I think we probably need 100 times more than what we have, and I'm laying emphasis on the term independence. I also feel that the manner in which the laws are evolved need more participative democracy rather than just democracy, because that's the only way we'll come out with sensible regulations. And finally is the point that all the panelists made, is the manner in which the bureaucracy goes about administering those laws. And the other point no one's talked about is the court system. I think we need to do a lot more in our subordinate court system. We have 6,000 judges vacancy in our entire country. We were supposed to have a target of 20 judges every 5 million. I think we have 1/5 of that. So I think there's lots to be done on the subordinate judiciary. I'm not talking about high courts and Supreme Court, which most of us in the city of Delhi are familiar with.
Manish.
So I just wanted to frame it that the regulatory cholesterol debate is a role about the role of the state. It is not about no state. Many of us were delusional and said, this grass grows at night while the government sleeps. We have hit the limits of the government sleeping. And it's all three who have to work together. The private sector has a trust deficit, the government has an execution deficit, and non-profits have a scale deficit. So I think the regulatory cholesterol debate should be framed as what is the role of the state? It's not to set things on fire. It is to create the conditions for spontaneous combustion. We have to remember that, right? And the second one about taxation, I think all of us should be mentally prepared that tax to GDP ratio must go from 18 to 30%. A modern state is a welfare state, but Norway, Sweden, and Finland have a 40% tax to GDP ratio, but they are also 3, 4, and 5 in ease of doing business, right? So how you finance your welfare state, a modern state is a welfare state, how you finance it is not by borrowing. How you finance it is by creating a private sector from whom you can tax the resources in a consistent way. So I think we have to recognize that in the next 20 years, tax to GDP ratio has to go up as a policy objective. You can only do that with ease of doing business or making life easy for genuine wealth creators who make profits and pay taxes. And the regulatory cholesterol debate is not about a good state is a zero state, a good state is an invisible state. A good state does things that the private sector can't do. See, I'm sick and tired of manufacturing my own employees, of providing my own transport, of generating my own electricity. I mean, these are not things that employers should be doing. So my submission is, let's not frame the regulatory cholesterol debate as anything other than swimming in your lane. I'll swim in my lane, you swim in your lane. There's a role for regulators, and the tax to GDP ratio will go up, and all of us should be ready for it.
Final word today, Sanjeev, to you as we wind down this debate.
So, well, I mean, I would say that we have made fairly good progress over the years. I think the whole digitization focus that we have launched, I think is incredible. Let's be clear that a lot of these things started only in 1991. So effectively, we are 3 decades into it. While we are 75 years, it's really been a 3-decade story. So I think we shouldn't beat ourselves too much. I mean, we are also a very, very populous nation. So we are actually, this is the voice of so many people, right? So we also need to take that into consideration. And at times, I think obviously there'll be more things to deal with if we are so popular. So I think at times we do not consider that enough. And the one other thing that I would say is that execution. I think we all sit in podiums like this, give a lot of gyan. Today also we are saying that contracts should be better. We have been saying that forever. We can say that, okay, you should have consistency in policy, etc. But what is it that we are doing, as Mukesh also said, to say that, okay, how should that actually happen? I mean, take up thing one by one. I mean, we're, for instance, talking about GST, 47 committee meetings, etc., but still we are where we are. We talked about insolvency code. It's made progress, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Take things one by one, etc., and then say that, okay, this is how it is. And then don't look left and right. I mean, that's the way I think about it. Execution is the key to my mind.
Don't look left or right, swim in your lane. Final words from this panel. Thank you very much for that very engrossing and enriching debate. Thank you very much.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.